Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the OLA Adult Ed Faith Formation Weekly Gospel Podcast, where we take 15 minutes, sit down together, and unpack Sunday's Gospel reading. So when we hear it proclaimed at Mass, we'll have a better understanding of and appreciation for what the Word of God has for us. And again, we are in the year of Luke, so our Gospel this Sunday will be coming from the Gospel of Luke. It'll be chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, and it's the very well-known passage of Martha and Mary. So before we get started, let's remind ourselves of a few principles that I haven't brought up lately, and that is context, 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 and watch, listen, and read closely because words have meaning. Luke 10, verses 38 to 42, Martha and Mary. And the reason I bring up our Bible study kind of principles is I want to toss in another one. And, you know, there's a saying that says familiarity breeds contempt. Well, sometimes if we're not careful, in Scripture study, familiarity breeds complacency. And this is probably a good example of that because I'm guessing most, if not all of us, are very familiar with the Martha and Mary episode. And because we're so familiar with it, we often say, yes, we know what it is. We've heard it so many times. We've read it so many times. And we kind of go on autopilot when we hear it proclaimed. And oftentimes that's a danger if we fall into that trap, because then we set ourselves up for missing a lot of the nuance and the subtleties of not just this gospel passage, but any gospel passage that we're very familiar with. We get very complacent. We say, we know it, there's nothing more to see here, let's move on. When, in point of fact, one of the reasons why we do these gospel podcasts in general is to kind of just mine the depths of these passages more fully, kind of tease out some details and some nuances and some subtleties that, we've often read many times, heard many times, but never really took in, never really attached any significance to, or maybe didn't know the meaning of, or maybe even worse than that, didn't even realize it was in the reading. So I say all of this because even though it's a very familiar passage, Martha and Mary, even though it's only 4 verses, there's a lot of nuance and subtlety in here that this podcast, hopefully, if I do a halfway decent job, will bring out. One more thing we want to remind ourselves before we dive into the passage itself is this is Luke chapter 10. And as we mentioned last week, in the Gospel of Luke, from chapters 9 to 19 is called the travel narrative, because everything Jesus says and does in Luke's gospel from chapter 9 to 19, he's saying and doing on his final journey to Jerusalem on the way to the cross. So because this is his final journey and because he is heading to the cross, everything he says and does in 9 to 19 of Luke, it's even more significant because of where he's going and what's going to happen to him there. So we want to keep that in mind as well. So what I want to do is I want to read you the entire passage because it's fairly short. Then we'll go back to the beginning and kind of tease out some of those nuances and subtleties that, again, our familiarity with this episode might have caused us to miss or not even see. So here's how Luke records this episode. He says, Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary, who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me. The Lord said to her in reply, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. Very, very familiar passage. We've heard it, we've read it any number of times. So let's now go back to the beginning, and let's tease out some nuances and subtleties that maybe we didn't realize. Jesus entered a village. Let me hit the pause button. The village he's entering is the village of Bethany. And Bethany is just outside of Jerusalem, and it is the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So that's the village. That's the locational setting, where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed them. So get the picture. Jesus hits town. He hits Bethany, right? He's coming to the home of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Martha is the one that welcomes him. All right? He comes in, and he starts speaking, and Mary is sitting at his feet listening to him speak, while Martha now is busy kind of providing all the hospitality. So let me hit the pause button again here, all right? Again, first century, hospitality was everything. If you didn't offer a guest in your house the requisite amount of hospitality, that was not a good look at all, okay? So with hospitality being everything, Martha is providing that hospitality. It was expected. It was a big deal back in those times, all right? So Martha's providing the hospitality. She's running around getting everything taken care of. Mary's sitting by Jesus' feet listening to him. All right? Now Martha then says, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me. So Martha's getting a little perturbed, all right, at Mary not helping Martha with the requisite hospitality. She's getting a little perturbed, and she tells Jesus about it and wants Jesus to tell Mary to help your sister with the hospitality, right? So, how does Jesus respond? He says, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. Now, Jesus' response, what he says, the words he uses, and what he hones in on is the interpretive key that's going to unlock this whole passage. Because one way that this episode can be looked at, a common way it's taught, is it brings out the push and pull between in religious life, right? In trying to be religious. On the one hand, you want to act out your faith, right? Because we always say, the faith is not passive; it's active. So on one hand, you want to act out your faith by serving people, by doing things, by living out your faith. On the other hand, the faith requires a certain amount of contemplation, quietness, prayerfulness. So there's always a push and pull between the activity part of the faith and the contemplative part of the faith, and you want to strive for balance. That's oftentimes how this passage is interpreted, and that's oftentimes how it's taught. Now, certainly, on one level, that's in play. Is that push and pull? Is finding the balance between activity and contemplation. That's at play, certainly, okay? But at a deeper level, there's something else going on here. And the interpretive key to unlock that deeper level is in what Jesus points out. When Martha says, look, I'm running around, I'm doing all the serving, Mary essentially is doing nothing, tell her to help me. And look at Jesus' response, particularly the words have meaning, right? Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. Now, the interpretive key is the anxious and worried. It's not the serving that is the issue here. It's not the activity and the running around that Martha's doing, that's the issue here. It's what that's doing to her. It's not necessarily what she's doing, the running around and serving and activity. It's what that's doing to her. And Jesus points that out. It's making her anxious and worried about many things. It's distracting her. all right? And it's interesting because if we come up with an example, all right, let's say that, because again, look at the situation. Jesus is in their home. He's speaking to them, right? Mary is listening. Martha is distracted because of all the running around and serving she's doing, all right? And really what Jesus is saying is, look, I'm in your house. I'm in your presence. I'm saying things, all right? Be in the present moment. I'm in your presence. Be in my presence. It would be an example where, let's say that, I don't know, you and I are having dinner, right? And we're in each other's presence. We're physically in each other's presence. We're sitting across from each other at the table, okay? You've taken the time to come to the restaurant. I've taken the time to come to the restaurant, and we're in each other's presence. And I'm speaking to you, right? And then, you've got your phone on the table, right? And you can see that you're getting some messages or you're getting some phone calls. So you're kind of just, every time, you hear your phone buzz or it lights up a little bit, it distracts you, all right? You take a quick look at it, all right? You're not in the present moment. You're distracted by something else. That's what Jesus is telling Martha. He's telling her, look, Martha, it's not the activity. It's not the serving. It's not the hospitality, because that's a big part of the culture. That's not what the problem is. The problem is it's distracting you from being in my presence, all right? And Mary is not distracted. She's not anxious. She's not worried, all right? She's honed in on me. Martha, kind of take a hint, all right? And then he says, Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. All right. So again, the contemplative aspect, the prayerful aspect, the quiet aspect, the listening to God's voice. All right. Whatever activity we do for the Lord, all right, we first have to make sure we spend time with the Lord, listening to the Lord, before we do the activity of the Lord. There's a saying that says, don't be so busy doing the work of the Lord that you forget about the Lord of the work. And that's kind of what's going on here. We're doing the Lord's work. So before we do that, we should spend some time in prayer with the Lord before we go out and do the Lord's work, all right? Because it's the Lord's work we're doing. We're doing it. We're playing our part. We're partnering with him, definitely. But it's his work that we're doing, not ours. And if it's his work that we're doing, we should spend time with him before we go out and do it. That's the deeper issue here, okay? So again, on one level, yes, you want to strike a balance between the activity and the contemplative aspects of the religious life of our faith. But at a deeper level, you don't want the activity, you don't want to be so active that you have no time for prayer, that you have no time for contemplation, that you have no time for listening to the Lord. You can't be so busy doing the Lord's work that you have no time for the Lord of the work. So that's kind of what's going on here. So again, only 4 verses, a very well-known episode to be sure. But hopefully in this podcast, we've kind of we've taken what Jesus said about Mary being distracted and anxious and worried about many things. And we've used that as the interpretive key for kind of the lesson for not only Martha back then, but for us now. Is yes, okay, we can't be so busy, we can't be so distracted with normal work, let alone doing the Lord's work, that we don't have time for the Lord himself. and listening to what he's telling us. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully it brought up some subtlety and some nuance that maybe we hadn't considered before. And with that, we're hitting the 15-minute mark. So I'll go ahead and wrap up this episode. And until we sit down again next week, again from the campus of St. Bonaventure High School with Max behind the camera, I'm Charles Merritt. Take care and God bless.